In this video, we will discuss near-death experiences and to some extent, how they may relate to UAP. This is part 2 of my previous video titled UFOs and the Afterlife Part 1. If you haven't yet watched that installment, I highly recommend that you do prior to this one. It will be the second link in the description box below. Just like the last video, this one too will be highly predicated on the knowledge gleaned from the book Life After Life by Dr. Raymond Moody. But we'll also cite the book Here and Hereafter for Good Measure by clairvoyant medium Tyler Henry, who is actually an active member of UFO Twitter, which is kind of cool. I was pleasantly surprised how well the first installment of this 2-part video did. So thank you for those that have supported this effort through watching the video, sharing the video, liking the video, commenting, and just paying attention to what I'm doing. I have my cup of coffee handy, so I've come prepared to continue this effort, and we are on video number 2 of this 2-part series. Let's dig into a very commonly reported element of near-death experiences, which can be referred to as meeting others. Raymond Moody notes, the dying person's feelings of loneliness are soon dispelled, however, as he gets deeper into his near-death experience, for at some point, others come to him to give him aid in the transition he is undergoing. These may take the form of other spirits, often those of deceased relatives or friends the individual had known while he was alive. In a greater number of instances among those I interviewed, a spiritual being of a much different character appears. In the next few sections, we'll look at such encounters. Meeting others, quite a few have told me that at some point while they were dying, sometimes early in the experience, sometimes only after other events had taken place, they become aware of the presence of other spiritual beings in their vicinity, beings who apparently were there to ease them through their transition into death, or in 2 cases, to tell them that their time to die had not yet come and that they must return to their physical bodies. I get the impression that most of the cases that are included in near-death experience stories are from people that were not really expecting to die, whether it's from a car accident or in the midst of an operation or some sudden illness that befalls them. In contrast to people that, for example, spend some time at a hospice and anticipate their death. And in fact, it's very common to hear people that are spending some time at a hospice that while they're there and as they approach closer their moment of death, even in their wakeful state, their alive state, they do perceive that loved ones or friends that have departed come to greet them as if to prepare them for the transitioning process. And I find that interesting because it makes me wonder if they have, that is, those that are being prepared, at least mentally, because they know they're going to die at a hospice, if they have the same experiences as those that are not being mentally prepared to die because they don't see it coming. As I covered in the previous part of this 2-part video, many find it unthinkable when their spirit leaves their body as they perceive it. And they are conceptually confused. And they do not link their experience to death for a considerable time. And they ask themselves questions like, why am I seeing my body as a spectator? Because they didn't anticipate they would die. It came on suddenly without warning. Contrast that to people in a hospice who know they're going to die and probably have had experiences seeing loved ones greet them while they get close to that transition. Do they also have that same degree of conceptual confusion or find it unthinkable as they see their body from afar as a spectator? I would imagine it's possible, if not likely, that the disorientation of someone at a hospice when their physical container expires is much less, if even existent, compared to those who didn't see it coming and suddenly their spirit leaves their body. As Raymond Moody conveyed in the previous passage, there were two incidents where a spiritual being told the person that was dying that it's not yet your time. Clairvoyant medium Tyler Henry has a fascinating analysis about that element of a near-death experience that happens relatively frequently. In his book, he speaks about Buddy Holly and his wife. Buddy Holly, the famous singer. One night in January of 1959, both of them had individual nightmares relating to a plane. And his wife dreamed that the plane crashed. Buddy died in a tragic airplane accident less than a month after the eerie coincidence. It was clear that some force was at work, communicating to the couple of the events that were to come, as the book states. Now I'm going to read a passage from Tyler Henry's book, Here and Hereafter, which is an excellent book that I recommend. And by the way, I'm on my second cup of coffee, so you don't have to worry about me. However, I'm not going beyond the second. Now, this is related to that element that is fairly frequently reported in NDEs where someone is told by a spiritual being, it's not yet your time. From the book. This story, regarding the story I just shared with Buddy Holly and his wife, might make you question, if the couple had put enough weight into their dreams so as to not fly on planes from there on out, could they have saved Buddy's life? I don't believe so. I've seen too many indications that there's some design behind when we're born and when we depart. The times we live in require our consciousness to be in them. And when our role in our time in history is done, we pass away. This idea is reflected in countless reports by near-death experiencers who almost universally acknowledge understanding the sentiment of, it's not your time. Whether the experiencer is told this by a spirit or the presence of God, or just has some telepathic understanding, this report is incredibly common. This leads me to believe that the phenomenon wants us to know that there's a purpose behind why we're here when we are. Why would it go out of its way to tell us it's not our time to die? The fact that the sentiment is expressed at all indicates that there is a significance in the timing of our passing. That analysis by Tyler Henry is fascinating on a variety of levels. He stated that, I've seen too many indications that there's some design behind when we're born and when we depart. And that triggers me to think about going beyond the purpose behind when we're born and when we depart. That there's even more planning than that, in my subjective opinion, of which I cannot prove, of course. I've heard many reports of people who've had NDEs talk about how souls choose their parents prior to being born. I've heard, for example, in Leslie Kane's Netflix special, there was a woman in it. During her near-death experience, she was told that her son would die later in life, and he ultimately did at a very young age. But I think even a lot of what we experience in our lifetime, and I know it's going to be controversial what I'm about to say, but I assess that a lot of what we experience in our lifetime was pre-planned. Now, that's not to suggest that free will is not a core component of this experience. It's just to intimate that we've come here in large part for a curriculum to be experienced and therefore to learn certain lessons from that curriculum, which is different for every soul that comes into this world, in my perspective. And then part of that may be the parents we have and the challenges that presents. The people that we encounter along the way and the challenges that presents. Even health and our mental framework. Some of us may have what would be referred to as neurodivergence as opposed to being neurotypical. Even our IQ level, our tendencies. For example, some people have a big tendency to have a temper while other people don't. I could go on and on. I think that a lot of what we experience, and this is just a very subjective faith-based perception of mine, and I'm making that very clear, but I personally believe a lot of what we experience in our sojourn on some level was mapped out prior to even being born as part of a curriculum for us to experience and therefore learn lessons catered to us based upon our journey as eternal forms of consciousness, if you will. From that recent passage, the times we live in require our consciousness to be in them, and when our role in our time in history is done, we pass away. Well, you know what I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it. I assess, although I could be wrong, that we are going through a process collectively right now, leading to a moment colloquially referred to as disclosure. It will comprise of the greatest discovery in human history thus far, that we are not alone and we are being engaged by non-human intelligences. A discovery that has already been made scientifically in aerospace companies, parts of the military structure and intelligence community, but has not been brought to bear publicly yet. And that will come to pass. Of course, disclosure could come from Dr. Avi Loeb too. Disclosure does not necessitate coming from a government entity. It's just one of the options on the table. And I believe this will happen. And I know I'm ridiculed for that, and that's fine. But the bottom line is that if the phenomena exists, government, no. Period. Point blank. We don't need to go into that any further. And I believe the phenomena exists. Too many witnesses over too long a period of time, too many consistencies in their stories, too many commonalities, too many patterns, too many corroborated events. The USS Nimitz UFO event series is one of the best. Capiche? Capiche? We were, if the model of Tyler Henry is correct, we are meant to be here during this time, which may end up proving to be the biggest moment in human history and may be written about for tens of thousands of years to come. I don't know what that means, but I'm glad to be on this ride. Are you? Let's talk about the light being, shall we? Raymond Moody notes, what is perhaps the most incredible common element in the accounts I have studied, and is certainly the element which has the most profound effect upon the individual, is the encounter with a very bright light. Despite the light's unusual manifestation, however, not one person has expressed any doubt whatsoever that it was a being of light. Not only that, it is a personal being. It has a very definite personality. The love and the warmth which emanate from this being to the dying person are utterly beyond words, and he feels completely surrounded by it and taken up in it, completely at ease and accepted in the presence of this being. He senses an irresistible magnetic attraction to this light. He is ineluctably drawn to it. I would personally imagine that every single soul that passes on to the other side at some point in their experience in transitioning experiences this being of light and this unconditional love and warmth. However, that's not to suggest that in the NDE model, if you will, that it is devoid of judgment, because there is judgment in the NDE model, and that factors into the element of a near-death experience called the life review, which we will get to relatively shortly. When coming into the presence of the light being, Raymond Moody notes, the being almost immediately directs a certain thought to the person into whose presence it has come so dramatically. Usually the persons with whom I have talked try to formulate the thought into a question. Among the translations I've heard are you prepared to die? Are you ready to die? What have you done with your life to show me? And what have you done with your life that is sufficient? The first two formulations, which stress preparation, might at first seem to have a different sense from the second pair, which emphasize accomplishment. However, some support for my own feeling that everyone is trying to express the same thought comes from the narrative of one woman who put it this way. The first thing he said to me was that he kind of asked me if I was ready to die or what I had done with my life that I wanted to show him. Incidentally, all insist that this question, ultimate and profound as it may be in its emotional impact, is not at all asked in condemnation. That being, all seem to agree, does not direct the question to them to accuse or threaten them, for they still feel the total love and acceptance coming from the light, no matter what their answer may be. Rather, the point of the question seems to be to make them think about their lives, to draw them out. It is, if you will, a Socratic question, one asked not to acquire information, but to help the person who is being asked to proceed along the path to the truth by himself. Before I give my analysis on all this, I want to share one last passage from someone that I understand Moody interviewed that had an NDE. Yet, from the moment the light spoke to me, I felt really good, secure, and loved. The love which came from it is just unimaginable, indescribable. It was a fun person to be with. And it had a sense of humor too, definitely. I find it incredibly fascinating that it is commonly reported that when people or their soul comes into contact with the light being, that the being of light asks a question, and that this question that is asked is a common question among many people who have had NDEs, as far as I understand, from Raymond Moody. Now, in the book, he expressed 4 of those questions as if it could be perceived as if they were all different. But later said he doesn't think that they are all different. Earlier, he spoke about how the exchange with the light being does not take place in a person's native language. We've gone over this before. Communication in this realm is much more sophisticated than understanding through someone's vocal cords and the physics of sound. It's precise. It cannot be misinterpreted. So people that pass into this realm and have this conversation with the light being, whatever the light being told them, now they have to translate this languageless telepathy, if you will, into English. Thus, it does not surprising at all that different people may translate it differently, but it appears that the same thing is being asked to each individual. And as Moody notes, the people that describe this experience do not convey that that the question asked by the light being was done in condemnation. Instead, it was done to get them to think about their lives, to draw them out, if you will. And that last passage I shared with you, the person said his impression of the light being was it was a fun person to be with and that he had a sense of humor, definitely. That's really fascinating. And this is a common feature, from what I understand of the NDE, is that when people get in contact with this light being, they perceive that it does have what could be described as a personality. And that's fascinating. That, in my opinion, if this is indeed God, would challenge the idea that God is merely a force or a field, but instead it's more like a deity, frankly. Now, we need to be careful here. When a soul is in communication with the light being is of course going to lower its level to that of the soul, which I'm sure it's fully capable of if it actually created the entire universe and all of reality. My point is, just because the light being can easily communicate with a soul that it created doesn't mean it's on the level of a human being. It could be that this origin consciousness is infinite. But in order to speak with the human soul, it obviously has to present itself at the level of the human soul. And this remains true even though it appears that when the consciousness exits the human body, it becomes like a super genius, exceeding any genius to ever live in the physical form on this planet, and may ever live for that matter. But it's still nowhere near the infinite consciousness of the Almighty, the creator of the heavens and the earth, if you want to go that route. And so my point is that you need to be cautious if you interpret this to being, oh, God is so simplistic. No, God is capable of being an infinite being that can still communicate with a very finite being. Now, some people in some New Age thought would say, no, we are not finite. We are infinite. And I would argue, no, we are part of God, but we are not the whole of God. There's a difference. We are part of God, an extension of the divine, but not the totality of God. In fact, if you believe that the human soul evolves for eternity, that itself demonstrates how distant we are from the infinite. That's how I see it, at least. Seems like a good day to analyze the life review. What do you say? Raymond Moody notes, the initial appearance of the being of light and his probing nonverbal questions, which we just went over, are the prelude to a moment of startling intensity during which the being presents to the person a panoramic view of his life. It is often obvious that the being can see the individual's whole life displayed and that he doesn't himself need information. His only intention is to provoke reflection. This review can only be described in terms of memory, since that is the closest familiar phenomenon to it, but it has characteristics which set it apart from any normal type of remembering. First of all, it is extraordinarily rapid. The memories, when they are described in temporal terms, are said to follow one another swiftly in chronological order. Others recall no awareness of temporal order at all. The remembrance was instantaneous. Everything appeared at once, and they could take it all in with one mental glance. However it is expressed, all seem in agreement that the experience was over in an instant of earthly time. Raymond Moody has interviewed a lot of people that have claimed they experienced a life review. Some of them say that they see everything that has taken place in their life, from the most insignificant all the way to the most meaningful. And some say that they've only experienced mostly the highlights of their life during the life review. I heard someone recently say that someone that had a life review said it was so vivid and you could take it all in so exquisitely that you could like count how many mosquitoes were in the surrounding environment. And yet, no matter how people experience the life review, whether they perceive it as chronological order or as if it's happening all at once, in other words, every event from their life just expressing itself in the life review all at once, all agree that when they experience the life review, it happens in an instant of earthly time, which is a pretty provocative way to demonstrate the level of computational ability of a soul untethered from the physical mind versus our capacity as we sojourn on this planet. And he said in the book that some of the people he interviewed, for a period of time later, they could recall the events of their lives in incredible detail, as if their capacity to recollect events from their past was incredibly heightened in a way that is different from what they were capable of doing prior to the life review, prior to the near-death experience, which you could argue may fall under the umbrella of a little bit of high strangeness, in the sense that they changed in such a unambiguous way by being able to remember details of their lives they never were prior, post their near-death experience. Raymond Moody notes, as they witnessed the display, the being seems to stress the importance of two things in life: learning to love other people and acquiring knowledge. Learning to love other people is obviously a well-known emphasis of the light being that people say they came away with from their near-death experience. But acquiring knowledge is not emphasized as much from what I can see. And I find it particularly fascinating because it suggests, perhaps, that even in a failed life, if you will, something valuable is attained. Now, I don't know if that has limitations. I'm not God. I don't know how it works, but I get the perception that part of acquiring knowledge is making mistakes, even grave mistakes. In other words, I perceive that there is something attained even by virtue of our mistakes. There's value there, even though it's not necessarily good we made those mistakes, and it would have been better had we not. But not all is loss. There is still an acquiring of knowledge, even when we fail at loving others, which is what is often emphasized the most when people talk about the message the light being gave to those that have had near-death experiences. That concept that I just spoke of is well expressed in this portion of that chapter, where a woman describes her life review. She states, all through this, he, that is the light being, kept stressing the importance of love. The places where he showed it best involved my sister. I've always been very close to her. He showed me some instances where I had been selfish to my sister, but then just as many times where I had really shown love to her and had shared with her. He pointed out to me that I should try to do things for other people, to try my best. There wasn't any accusation in any of this, though. When he came across times when I had been selfish, his attitude was only that I had been learning from them too. As Raymond Moody points out, the life review's purpose is to provoke reflection. And it's interesting that some people who have, at least some, I guess, that have the life review, have noticed that the light being comments here and there, like I just demonstrated in the previous passage. But the judgment itself, from what I gather, from what I've read and heard, comes from the individual. The person that is perceiving how they live their life. And I don't think the life review is necessarily a walk in the park. And I think the severity of it, if you will, depends upon how you lived your life. Obviously, the better a human being you were, the less challenging it will be to go through the life review. That's my perception, at least. But I don't personally resonate with the idea that there is no judgment in the world to come. To me, that would suggest that our actions don't mean a whole lot. Doesn't matter how you live, you're good. No, I don't buy that. I think it does matter how you live. I think our conduct, our behavior matters. How we impact others matters. If it didn't matter, there would be no life review. If it didn't matter, we wouldn't be our judge as we watch how we conducted ourselves through our life. And then there's the question of reincarnation, which I'm not really going to go into in this video, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least if how we behave in this world has an influence on the nature of our subsequent life. So, while I don't perceive God as like this entity that is hell-bent on revenge, if you will, I also don't perceive God as some people like to portray God, which is the other extreme in my opinion, that there's no judgment. No, there is judgment. If there was no judgment, there would be no life review. That elicits judgment from the person going through the life review. Of course there's judgment. I guess my point is, it probably behooves all of us to be kinder human beings. And that could influence our next life. It will definitely influence our life review. And there's a lot of mysteries about the afterlife. All we know is what people have been able to tell us from their experience, which may be very limited. How far into that transition can they actually go if they're going to be coming back? And in Tyler Henry's book, I think it's titled Here and Hereafter, which there's a link to it in the description below. If you click on that link and finalize a purchase, I will get a small commission. But I recollect from the book, he said, one of the biggest regrets souls have from their past life when they're communicating with Tyler is they wish they would have been more kind. A short little passage from Tyler Henry from his book Here and Hereafter, where he gives his take on the life review. I find it very balanced and insightful. He writes, "The life review is pivotal in reaching peace. It might not sound pleasant to rewatch everything you've gone through, but you experience it in a less human way. The consciousness, separate from its body, rapidly begins processing its ego upon death. We recognize the shortcomings of others and are made immensely clear about our own dysfunction. More significantly, we begin to understand why we did what we did and why certain setbacks happened to us. This process is introspective. Even the most sociopathic individuals are forced to understand the magnitude of the pain they caused. Ultimately, we realize our existential place in the universe and we get why we were here. It's as if the puzzle pieces fall into place. When we've realized how our one consciousness changed everyone it ever came into contact with, we become enlightened as to the roles we and others played." And just to clarify, here's an exact quote that I was referencing in the previous clip, if you will, from Tyler Henry's book, Here and Hereafter. One of the most resounding messages that gets communicated to me from those who've lived and died is, I should have just been kinder. There were many sections of Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, that I did not cover in this presentation. And even the sections that I did cover, I think I only really scratched the surface. The book is a lot more in depth. And of course, if you're interested in that book or in Tyler Henry's book, Here and Hereafter, you can purchase those books below. I've left some links. If you do click those links and finalize a purchase of something, I'll get a small commission. I want to talk very briefly as we wrap this video up about suicide, because I do feel some slight concern that someone may start digging into the NDE literature and think that that might bolster the decision to end their life early. And all I'm going to say is this. From what I've gathered by listening to people who have really studied this in depth, it seems like there's a good chance that we come into this world to fulfill a curriculum. That curriculum needs to be fulfilled. If you end it early, I think there's a good chance you'll just get incarnated again. Your circumstances will get reshuffled. You'll have different parents, different siblings, or what have you, but the challenges will be equivalent. So it's not really going to do you any favors. In fact, it's going to elongate that which you find very challenging. That's all I'm going to say about that. I do believe, even though I get ridiculed for it, that we are moving toward a post-disclosure world. And it's easy to ridicule that position. But if you look at the past 5 years, and don't ignore the past 5 years, it gets a lot harder to ridicule that position. Because by any objective standard, we have made incredible progress. Former President Barack Obama conveyed the reality of this phenomena. Congress feels like they've been lied to about this issue by the Pentagon, and they are pursuing answers. They have created legislation to allocate funds for a UFO study program in the Pentagon. Immunity language has been drawn up so that people who are involved in legacy UAP programs can come forward, give their testimony without fear of reprisal. It's easy to ridicule when you ignore the past 5 years. I'm going to call it like I see it, baby. It is what it is. A post-disclosure world, assuming I'm correct about that, because maybe the phenomena is not what I perceive, and I'm the one that's wrong, which I do not rule out. But like I said earlier in this video, if the phenomena exists, some governments know. Period. Not even going to try to argue the point. You disagree? Have at it, boss. In a post-disclosure world, ironically, it will be a time period of skepticism about what the universe constitutes. Skepticism of the assumptions we as a civilization have made about reality. Like I told you in my previous video, UAP, whether they intended or not, are evolutionary primers, gap annihilators. They will awaken our species once disclosure dawns and all 8 billion of us are focused on the reality that there is non-human technology in our biosphere, skies and ocean, engaging our species. It will be a time of skepticism. We will be looking into these questions. Not just UAP, we'll be looking into the question of, does consciousness survive death? Does psi exist? Now, if you ask someone like Dr. Dean Radin, he would tell you that the evidence is overwhelming that psi exists. That the studies that have been done very carefully, methodically, demonstrate it well beyond a shadow of a doubt. And that's not for me to debate right now. But we will look into all of those issues with much greater enthusiasm, funds. Because once it dawns that UAP are here and they're real, it's going to trigger pursuing other topics. And the ridicule factor is just going to melt away. Science is going to do what science does, which studies mysteries and strives to get to the bottom of the greatest questions, anomalies. That's a post-disclosure world. And a lot of what I said today, it's just my perception of the NDE. I've said it multiple times. I could be completely wrong about NDEs. Maybe it's just the brain that's not getting enough oxygen. Now, there is a lot of very compelling evidence that NDEs do comprise of people's consciousness leaving their body, because there have been a lot of corroborated events where the person that experienced an NDE will have knowledge of details they should not have, demonstrating that their consciousness exited their body and went elsewhere. But that's beyond the scope of this video. At some point, I will cover that. And I'll cover other elements of the NDE experience that were not included in this video. And I will read more about this phenomenon and cover it ever so often on this channel. Please do not forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, you can support my channel. I have a merch shop where I sell t-shirts. You become a patron. You could become a YouTube member. You could give me a one-time donation, or you could just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching. Ocean. If you've gotten this far, type in ocean in the description so I can feel warm and fuzzy inside knowing that you watched until this point. I'll see you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.